Hi friends, today we're doing a short how-to video where I'll be taking you through the Vīrabhadrāsana series, so Warrior 1, Warrior 2, and Warrior 3. And this is just a nice foundational practice to help us just make sure that we're in proper alignment. So this is great if you're a beginner, but it's also great if you've been practicing for a while and you want to sort of recenter, reground yourself, and come back to basics. So this isn't going to be like a full flow. We're just going to go into these 3 warrior poses and make sure that we're setting ourselves up so that we are in a safe and proper alignment. So if you are with me and ready, we can go ahead and get started at the top of our mat. So go ahead and come into a Tadasana, a mountain pose here. And then we'll start with our right leg coming back so you can see what I'm doing here. So we'll start with Vīrabhadrāsana 1, Warrior 1. We'll step back about 3 to 4 feet here. And if you need to adjust your stance so that you're on more of a railroad train track type of a stance here instead of one straight line, that's going to help with your balance. So set yourself up. You might need to adjust, move around, do what you need to do so that you feel stable and comfortable. Your back leg, your back heel, is going to turn in a little bit so that your toes are pointing in about a 45-degree angle. Your front knee is going to bend forward so that your knee is about stacked over your ankle here. Check in with your knee and make sure it's not falling in or falling out. We want to keep that pretty neutral. So again, if you need to make adjustments here to make this work for you, go ahead and do that. When you feel like you have a sturdy, steady base here, you can inhale your arms up towards the ceiling, biceps by ears. And in Warrior 1, our hips are going to be more towards the front of the mat here. You might hear some teachers cue you to turn both eyes of the hips up to the front side. Although I kind of like to keep them more at that 45-degree angle so they're coming up towards that right diagonal of my mat. Here, and what that is going to do is that's going to keep my knee from torquing to either side. So that's the positioning that I like to use to keep a safe alignment. Everybody is different, so your body's alignment in this pose might be different than mine or your neighbors or your friends. So take what version of it feels safe and accessible for you. Inhale here, exhale. You can sink a little bit deeper into that front knee. What we don't want is we don't want that front knee to come over those top toes. So try to keep everything stacked as much as possible. You can turn this pose into a little bit of a back bend if you want. You can press your palms together or bring your index fingers together and put a little bit of a back bend here. Releasing down and stepping to the front of the mat. And then setting up to do the same thing on the opposite side. So stepping that right or that left foot back. Again, adjusting yourself wherever you need to make sure you have a stable and sturdy base. Bending in to that front right knee, making sure that that left leg is turned out so that your toes are about at a 45-degree angle. Same thing with your hips. Hips are a 45-degree angle towards the front of the mat. Inhaling, arms can come up. You can take that little back bend here if that feels good. And then release. Cricket wants to do warrior as well, so she can come over here, but she won't be naughty. So that's Vīrabhadrāsana 1. You can also do this on a chair. I don't have my chair with me, but I can make a future video showing how to do these poses on a chair as well if standing isn't great or doesn't feel totally accessible for you. So we'll set up for Warrior 2 now. Excuse me. Same thing, we're coming to the front of our mat and we'll start with that right leg coming back. So stepping back 3 to 4 feet, Again, making sure you have a sturdy base here, and then bending in to that front left leg. Now here's where you're going to hear a lot of teachers cue to have that back foot parallel to the back of your mat. This is sort of an unusual cue. The way I was taught was that we're not really sure where this cue came from, but it's a very Western thing. In original practices of yoga, in some of Iyengar's yoga, we don't get this cue to parallel the back of the foot. And the reason I like to not teach this cue is because when we do this, and then when we also turn our hips towards the side of the mat, which we also hear a lot, see what happens to that front knee. So here I am, my back foot is parallel, I've turned my hips towards the side, I'm in my warrior two. The natural position here for my front leg is going to be to collapse in. So I can fix this here, right? I can push that out. But if you're in this pose doing this along with me, you can feel that that's kind of putting a little bit of pressure here that maybe doesn't feel great. That's kind of torquing my hip, torquing my leg. So here's how I like to cue this pose instead. So instead of having the back foot parallel, I'm going to keep it similar to Warrior One, where the heel is slightly turned in and the toes are slightly turned out, again in about a 45-degree angle here. I'm still bending over that front knee, inhaling, my arms are up as if they're on a shelf here. I'm pressing in to the back edge of that back foot to give myself stability here. And I'm allowing my hips to settle where they want to settle here. So I'm not pushing them over to the side of the mat. And where they are naturally is about, again, that 45-degree angle diagonally out. This is keeping my knee in alignment, and this is keeping my knee stacked over my ankle. So this works for my body. Again, your body might be different. So just check in with the way you're setting up your warrior two and making sure that it feels good for your body and that you're not torquing anything, that nothing is like tipping over to either side, and that you have a stable and sturdy base here. So inhale, straighten that leg, turn both of your toes to the long side of the mat, and then just heel toe them together enough that you can step back to the top of the mat. If you want to set up and do the same thing on the opposite side, we'll be stepping our left foot back this time. Go ahead and set yourself up here if you need to move your feet a little bit further apart to get that railroad track instead of that one straight line. Go ahead and do that here. Heels turn a little bit inward so that the toes can come out at that 45-degree angle, sinking over so that that front knee is stacked on top of that front ankle. Inhaling your arms up. Check in with that back arm. Sometimes we forget it and it ends up being down here or up here, but what we're really looking for is that straight, even line for both of our arms as if they were resting on a bookshelf. Find your breath here. And check in with your alignment. Make sure your knee isn't dropping to either side. Again, making sure your hips maybe aren't cranked over towards the long side of the mat, but at a more natural 45-degree angle here. Inhale, straighten that front leg. Arms can come to your waist. Slide your feet over to the long side of the mat and heel toe your feet together so that you can step back to center. So we have one left. We have Vīrabhadrāsana 3, Warrior 3, which is a balance pose. So if that's not really within your wheelhouse or you don't feel that's accessible for you today, I'll show you a version of that where you can actually just use the wall. You can also use a block if you don't want to come into a more intense expression of this. You can always use the block, and you can also use a wall to help you balance to get to the block. And just simply hinge your hips forward, placing your toes on the block here, keeping a straight spine, and hands can come to heart center. See if you can put a little micro bend in that knee. And then breathe here. So this is a version of that can help if you don't want to really make this a full balance pose. So that's an option for you here. If you'd like to come into the balance aspect of this, I'm going to start at the center of my mat so you can see me. We'll start by bringing that right leg back and up. So you can have your arms in a couple different positions here. Some people like airplane arms when they hinge over. Some people like their palms to their chest. You can also extend your arms overhead. For this purpose, I'll just take palms to center so you can see what I'm doing. So let's inhale that right leg up off the mat, bringing it up, and then hinging slowly forward. Keeping a straight spine here and beginning to extend that right leg long. Feeling as if there was a string pulling from the crown of your head. Bringing that right leg to about hips distance. We don't want to go above our hip. If it's below the hip, if you can only get it yay high or so, that's totally fine. Breathing in here, flexing your toes will help with balance. Trying not to hyperextend that standing knee. And then slowly hinging back upwards, dropping the foot back down. So then we can do the same thing on the opposite side. This time I'll put my arms up. See the difference here? My mat is a little bit wobbly here. Again, if you'd like to try this with a block, or even if you would like to try this with your foot against your wall, extending out, that's an option too. Inhale, if you're taking those arms up, lifting that left foot up this time, and then hinging forward at the hips so that you can extend that left leg long, flexing the toes, straight spine here. Leg does not come above the hip. Breathing. Careful to not hyperextend that standing leg. Being with any wobbles just means your body's learning. And on your exhale, slowly hinging back upwards and lowering your foot, shaking it out. So those are your warrior 1, your warrior 2, and your warrior 3. There are, of course, many different ways to teach these, to get into these poses. People will cue them differently based on your class or what you're doing. So the most important thing here, besides just learning your foundations, is learning what works for you and your body to make it accessible and safe. So feel free to come back to this, or feel free to check out other versions of Vīrabhadrāsana that work for you. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions or any comments, feel free to reach out. Thank you for practicing with me today. I'm Toga. Be well.